You know, they say your name is your legacy. The one thing you truly own, the one thing you pass down. Larsen. For 78 years, I wore that name like a well-fitted coat. Lars Larsen. Solid, dependable. A name that built a business from a rusty toolbox and a second-hand pickup truck. I was proud of it. I thought my children would be, too. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. The legacy they were interested in wasn't the name. It wasn't the values I tried to hammer into them: hard work, integrity, looking a man in the eye when you shake his hand. No, the legacy they coveted was the number printed on my bank statements. And they didn't just covet it, they felt entitled to it. They started counting my money before they'd even stopped counting my breaths. I remember the moment the scales fell from my eyes. It wasn't a dramatic explosion, not at first. It was a quiet, cold Tuesday in October. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the leather one by the fireplace that's molded to the shape of my old bones. My son, David, my eldest, the one he'd taught to throw a spiral and change a tire, was pacing in front of me. He had that look on his face, the one he gets when he's trying to sell you something you don't need. "Dad," he said, his voice too smooth, too careful. "We're just concerned. This house, it's a lot for you to manage. The stairs alone, what if you fall?" I grunted, sipping my coffee. "I've been walking these stairs for 40 years, David. I think I know the route." "It's not a joke, Dad." That was my daughter, Sarah, chiming in from the doorway. She had her mother's eyes, but none of her warmth. "Not anymore. We've been talking. We think it might be time to consider simplifying. Maybe a nice assisted living place over in Crestview. They have a golf course." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Assisted living. A polite term for a waiting room. They'd already moved me from my life into a box in their minds. I looked from David's patronizing smile to Sarah's pinched, anxious face. The greed was there, just beneath the surface, but it was the impatience that chilled me. They were so eager to get on with spending my life's work. "I'm fine right here," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Inside, I was shaking. This was my home, the home he'd shared with their mother for 50 years, until cancer took her. Every floorboard, every crack in the ceiling, held a memory of her. David stopped pacing and leaned over me, his shadow falling across my chair. "Be reasonable, Dad. We need to think about the future. Our future. The business, the estate, it's complicated. We should get a power of attorney drawn up, just to make things easier. For everyone. For everyone." The phrase echoed in the silent, tense room. I knew exactly which everyone he meant. It was them. It was always them. "I'm not signing over control of my life, David," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "Not while I'm still in my right mind." Sarah let out a short, sharp sigh, a sound of pure frustration. "Why do you have to be so difficult? We're trying to help you." "Are you?" I asked, and the room went very quiet. "Are you really?" That was the first crack, but the real earthquake came a week later. I'd been feeling poorly, a persistent cough that wouldn't quit, and David had insisted on driving me to the doctor. Insisted, like I was a child. I agreed, mostly to shut him up, but I think a part of me still hoped I was misreading them. Hope is a stubborn weed, even in a barren field. We were in the car, heading back. The doctor had said some scary words. Prognosis. Options. The air in the car was thick with unspoken thoughts. David was quiet for a long time, staring straight ahead at the road. Then he cleared his throat. "So," he began, his fingers tapping nervously on the steering wheel. "The doctor said, well, he said it's serious." "He did," I replied, watching the familiar streets of my town slide by. My town, the one he'd watched grow from a crossroads to a city. "Dad," David said, and his voice dropped, becoming conspiratorial. "This is exactly what we were talking about. Now, more than ever, we need to get our ducks in a row. The will, the business shares, we need to make sure everything goes smoothly to me and Sarah." To avoid complications, I felt a hot flush of anger rise up my neck. Here I was, barely processed the news that my time was shorter than I'd thought, and my son's first concern was the smooth transfer of assets. Not how are you feeling, Dad? Not what can we do? Just the ducks. The damn orderly ducks. Complications? I asked, my voice dangerously low. You know, he said, with a wave of his hand. Taxes, probate, maybe others. Others? What others? He glanced at me, then back at the road, a faint blush on his cheeks. Well, what about Mike? The name hit me like a physical blow. Mike, my brother's boy, my nephew, a good man, a kind man, had a falling out with his own father years ago, over something trivial and stupid, and had chosen to honor my family instead. Had even, in a gesture that had moved me to tears at the time, legally changed his last name from his father's to Larson. My name. Had done it 10 years ago. Said he wanted to carry on the name of the man who'd been a better father to him than his own. David and Sarah had never accepted him. They saw him as a threat, a parasite. What about Mike? I asked, my knuckles white as I gripped the armrest. Come on, Dad, David said, a nasty, sarcastic edge creeping into his voice. We all know why Hay's been hanging around so much these past few years. Why he changed his name. Hay's been playing the long game. Hay's waiting for his payday. He'll try to claim a piece of what's rightfully ours. Ours. The word hung in the air, toxic and absolute. He didn't say yours. He didn't say the family's. He said ours, as if my life's work was already their property. And Mike was a thief trying to break in. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. I just turned and stared out the window, the world blurring into streaks of green and grey. I felt a profound, soul-deep weariness. This wasn't just greed. This was a sickness. It had eaten away at them, turning my own children into vultures, circling a still warm body. And in that moment, staring at the passing trees, I made a decision. A cold, hard, final decision. If my name, Larson, no longer stood for hard work and integrity to them, if it was just a brand on a pile of money they felt entitled to, then they could have the name, but they wouldn't have the money. They wanted a tidy inheritance. It'd give them one they'd never forget. The plan started forming in my mind, piece by piece, as David prattled on about estate planners and tax loopholes. It was an audacious, almost cruel idea, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt like justice. Poetic justice. They were so obsessed with the name, with who was a true Larson. Well, I would use that very obsession against them. I waited until we got home. I pretended the doctor's visit had taken more out of me than it had. I played the feeble old man, letting David help me up the steps, a performance worthy of an Oscar. I needed them to think I was defeated. I needed them to get complacent. I'm tired, son, I mumbled, leaning on him. I think he'll lie down. Of course, Dad, he said, his voice dripping with a false concern that made my skin crawl. You get some rest. We'll take care of everything. Oh, I bet you will, I thought, but not in the way you imagine. I went to my room, but I didn't sleep. I sat at the small writing desk that had been Eleanor's, and I pulled out a clean sheet of paper. My hand, which had been shaking with suppressed rage in the car, was now perfectly steady. Clarity does that. Purpose does that. I picked up the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from sickness, but from adrenaline. I dialed a number I knew by heart. The phone rang once, twice. Hello. A warm, familiar voice answered. Mike, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It's Lars. I need to see you. Tonight. And Mike, don't tell anyone. There was a pause on the other end. A moment of understandable confusion. Then, simply, he'll be there, Uncle Lars. Whatever you need. I hung up the phone and leaned back in the chair. The first move had been made. The game was afoot, and for the first time in months, I felt truly alive. The hours dragged by. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant car engine, made me jump. I was a conspirator in my own home. I kept replaying David's words in my head. He'll try to claim a piece of what's rightfully ours. The arrogance of it solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about money. It was about principle. It was about showing them that actions have consequences. That you cannot treat people like atoms and expect a happy payout. Finally, a soft knock came at the back door. the one that led into the kitchen. I moved as quietly as I could, my old joints protesting, and unlocked it. Mike stood there, his face etched with concern. He was a big man, like I used to be, with calloused hands from a lifetime of honest work as a carpenter. He had my Eleanor's kind eyes. "Uncle Lars," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Are you okay? What's going on?" "Sit down, Mike," I said, gesturing to the kitchen table. "I have a story to tell you, and then I have a proposition." I told him everything. The doctor's prognosis, the conversation with David in the car, the years of subtle hints and not so subtle demands from both David and Sarah. I held nothing back. I watched his face shift from concern to disbelief, and then to a slow burning anger on my behalf. "They said what?" He finally interrupted, his voice a low growl. "That I'm just here for a payday. After everything you and Aunt Eleanor did for me. That's disgusting." "I know, Mike," I said, placing a hand on his arm. "I know, but it's given me an idea, a way to make a point they'll understand. But I can't do it without you. What I'm going to ask, it's strange. It might even seem cruel." Mike looked at me, his gaze steady. "Uncle Lars, you and Aunt Eleanor were the only ones who believed in me when I was a lost kid. You gave me a place to belong. You're the reason I changed my name. I carry Larson with pride. Whatever you need, you have it." His loyalty, so freely given, was a balm on my wounded heart. It also confirmed that I was making the right choice. "The will," I began, leaning closer. "My current will leaves everything split between David and Sarah. It's straightforward, but I'm going to change it, drastically." I laid out the plan. The core of it was so simple, so elegant in its irony, that a slow smile spread across Mike's face as I spoke. But it was a smile of grim understanding, not of greed. "You see the beauty of it, don't you?" I asked, feeling a strange, almost giddy sense of power. "I do," Mike said, nodding slowly. "I do. But are you sure? It will destroy them. It will tear the family apart." "Mike," I said, my voice cracking with emotion, "the family is already torn. It's an empty shell. They tore it apart themselves with their greed. This isn't about destruction. This is about truth. This is about ensuring that what I built goes to someone who values the man who built it, not just the building." We talked for over an hour, refining the details. There were legal hurdles, of course. It had to be ironclad. It had to be a will that would withstand the hurricane of legal challenges that David and Sarah would inevitably unleash. I would need a new lawyer, someone far away from this town, someone with no connections to my children. When Mike finally left, with a firm handshake and a promise of absolute secrecy, I felt a profound sense of peace. The path was clear. The die was cast. The next morning, I put phase 2 into action. I called David. "Son," I said, putting on my best frail voice, "I've been thinking about what you said, about the future." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the sudden, avaricious alertness. "Yes, Dad," he said, trying to sound casual. "You were right," I continued, laying it on thick. "I'm an old man. I'm tired. This illness, it's made me see I need to make things easier. For everyone." "I'm glad you're seeing reason," he said, and I could hear the triumph in his voice. It took every ounce of my willpower not to scream at him. "I want to meet with old man Henderson tomorrow," I said, referring to the family lawyer who had drawn up my previous will, "to talk about the paperwork, the power of attorney, the will, all of it." "That's a great idea, Dad," David said, his voice booming with fake cheer. "I'll set it up. I'll call his office right now." No, I said quickly. "I'll do it. I'm not completely useless yet. I needed to control this narrative. I'll call him. You and Sarah can meet me there tomorrow at 10. We'll get it all sorted out." I hung up before he could argue. My hands were trembling again, but this time with the thrill of the con. I was laying a trail of breadcrumbs, and my greedy children were following it with blinders on. Then, I made another call. This one was to a law firm in the city. One he'd found through a discreet inquiry, a firm known for its ruthless efficiency and the state litigation. I set an appointment for that very afternoon, under a pretext of a consultation about a non-existent property dispute. I told them I preferred to meet at their offices, citing a need for discretion. They agreed. The meeting with my children and lawyer Henderson the next day was a masterpiece of theatre. I played my part to perfection. I was subdued, agreeable, a little confused. I let David and Sarah lead the conversation. I nodded along as Henderson explained the power of attorney documents, giving them control over my finances and medical decisions. "This is for the best, Dad," Sarah said, patting my hand with a condescension that made my skin crawl. "Yes," I murmured, "the best." I even signed a new will, right there in front of them. It was a decoy, a beautifully crafted piece of misdirection. It left everything to David and Sarah, just as they expected, but it contained a single, subtle flaw, a minor technicality regarding the executor's duties that I knew Henderson, in his old age, might overlook, but that a sharp lawyer would rip apart. It was my insurance policy. It made the document look legitimate, while ensuring it wouldn't ultimately hold up if challenged. They left Henderson's office beaming, convinced they had won. They thought the safe was open and the combination was in their pockets. What they didn't know was that later that same afternoon, I was sitting in a sleek, modern office 60 miles away, with a sharp-eyed lawyer named Miss Evans, and I was signing a very different set of documents. The first was a petition for a legal name change. Miss Evans had been skeptical at first. "Mr. Larson, this is highly unusual. Are you certain about this?" "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," I told her, my voice firm. The second document was the real masterpiece, my last will and testament. It was a work of art. It left my entire estate, every last stock, bond, property, and dollar, to the descendants of Michael Larson. When Ms. Evans read that clause aloud, she looked up at me, her professional composure cracked. "Michael Larson, but I thought your son's name was David, and your Michael Larson is my nephew," I explained calmly. "He legally changed his surname to Larson a decade ago. My biological children have retained the Larson name, but they will not be named in this document. The beneficiary is specifically the descendants of Michael Larson. Since Mike is the only one who fits that description, it will all go to him." A slow smile of understanding spread across her face. She was a litigator. She appreciated a good, clean, legal strike. "This will be controversial," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "I'm counting on it," I replied. Signing that will was the most empowering moment of my life. The pen felt weightless in my hand. Each signature was a declaration of independence, a reclamation of my own soul from the vultures who wanted to pick it clean. I was no longer Lars Larson, the tired old man waiting to die. I was the architect of my own justice. The months that followed were a strange, quiet limbo. I continued to play my part. I let David and Sarah manage my affairs. They sold my truck, claiming it was unsafe. They hired a nurse to check in on me, who was really just a spy. I tolerated it all with a saintly patience that would have made Eleanor proud. Because I knew the clock was ticking, and I held the detonator. The strain of the secret, however, took its toll. My health, which had been a convenient prop for my act, began to genuinely fail. The cough worsened. The fatigue became a constant companion. There were moments, lying in the dark, when I wondered if I had been too harsh. Were they truly monsters, or just flawed, frightened children? But then I'd remember David's voice in the car, the naked greed, the casual cruelty toward Mike, and my resolve would harden like steel. The final confrontation began, as these things often do, with a phone call. It was Sarah. Her voice was shrill, panicked. "Dad, I just got a call from the county clerk's office. They said there's been a refiling, a name change. Lars Mike. What is this? What have you done?" I almost laughed. The bureaucracy of justice had finally caught up. The first domino had fallen. I took a deep breath, readying myself for the storm. "I've done what I should have done a long time ago, Sarah," I said calmly. "But why? Why would you do this? What does it mean?" she demanded, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "It means," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, that you should have cared more about the man than the money. I hung up on her sputtering. Within minutes, my phone was ringing again. David. I let it go to voicemail. I knew what was coming. I had to conserve my energy. The battle was about to begin, and I needed to be ready. An hour later, I heard the furious slamming of car doors outside. The front door flew open without a knock. David and Sarah stormed into the living room where I was sitting, their faces contorted with a rage I had never seen before. It was primal, ugly. The mask was off completely. David stood over me, his fists clenched. "What the hell is this, Dad?" he roared, waving a printout from the county clerk in my face. "Lars, Mike, what kind of senile, stupid game are you playing?" Sarah was crying, but they were tears of fury, not sadness. "How could you? Our name. You've betrayed our name. You've betrayed us." I looked up at them, my heart pounding, but my voice was eerily calm. "I've betrayed nothing. I've simply chosen a new name for myself. A man has a right to do that. A new name." David spat, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Mike, you named yourself after your gold-digging nephew. What did he do? Promise to take care of you. Promise to be the son we never were. Is that it?" "Mike has never asked me for a single thing," I said, meeting his glare. Unlike some people in this room, that ignited them. The accusations flew, a torrent of venom and entitlement. "We are your children," Sarah shrieked. "We deserve what's ours." "You've lost your mind," David yelled. "This is insanity. Well, have you declared incompetent? This farce won't stand." I let them rage. I let them scream themselves hoarse. I just sat there, watching them, seeing them for what they truly were. Strangers. Greedy, angry strangers in my living room. Finally, when they were spent, breathing heavily, I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a knife. "There's more," I said. They froze, staring at me. The anger in their eyes was now mixed with a dawning, terrible fear. They knew, somehow, in their guts, they knew that the name change was just the beginning. "What?" David whispered, his face pale. "The will," I said simply. "I've written a new one." The room was so quiet, I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. It was the clock Eleanor's father had built. It had ticked through our wedding day, through the births of our children, through her funeral, and now it was ticking through this. What does it say?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I looked from my son's ashen face to my daughter's terrified eyes. I took a slow, deliberate breath, savoring this last moment of power, this final act of defiance, and I told them. "It leaves everything," I said, my words clear and precise, "to the descendants of Mike." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a world ending. Their world. David's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Sarah stared at me as if he'd just sprouted a second head. The confusion was quickly replaced by a wave of pure, undiluted horror as the implication sank in. Mike had changed his name to Larson. The will left the estate to the descendants of Mike. They, David and Sarah Larson, were not descendants of Mike. They were descendants of me, of Lars, of the man who no longer existed. David found his voice first. It was a strangled, inhuman sound. "You can't, that's not possible." "It's very possible," I said. "It's legal, and it's done." The explosion that followed made their previous outburst seem like a polite disagreement. It was a hurricane of betrayal, of curses, of threats. They called me every name in the book. They promised to fight it. They promised to ruin me. They promised to ruin Mike. Through it all, I remained seated, watching them unravel. I felt no anger anymore, no sadness, just a cold, quiet satisfaction. Justice. This was what it looked like. It wasn't pretty. It was brutal and messy, and it shattered everything in its path. Eventually, they stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The house fell silent again, save for the steady, relentless ticking of the clock. I was alone. I had won. I had protected my legacy from the people who would have squandered it. I had executed my perfect revenge. So why did I feel so empty? Why did the victory taste like ash in my mouth? I sat there for a long time, As the afternoon light faded into evening, I thought about Eleanor. I wondered what she would have thought of all this. Would she have understood? Would she have been horrified? I like to think she would have agreed with me. She always had a fierce sense of right and wrong. The phone rang, shattering the silence. It was Mike. "Uncle Lars," he said, his voice tight with worrying. "David just called me. He was insane. He said some terrible things." "What's happening? Are you all right?" I took a deep breath. "It started, Mike," I said. "The war has begun. They know." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his loyalty unwavering. "Nothing right now," I said. "Just be ready. They're going to come for you. They're going to try and destroy you." "Let them try," Mike said, a new steel in his voice. "I'm not afraid of them." We talked for a few more minutes, and his calm strength reassured me. After I hung up, I felt a little better. I hadn't a lie. I had done the right thing. But as I prepared for bed that night, a new, chilling thought began to creep into my mind. I had been so focused on the legalities, on the grand gesture of the name change and the will, that I had overlooked something crucial. David had threatened to have me declared incompetent. It was a standard threat, one he'd expected. But what if he wasn't just bluffing? What if he and Sarah were already plotting it? A doctor's evaluation, a sympathetic judge. As they could prove I was of unsound mind when I signed those documents, my entire plan would collapse. The decoy would stand. They would get everything. The thought sent a jolt of pure, cold fear through me. My revenge, my justice, it was all built on the foundation of my mental competence. What if my own body, my own failing mind, became the tool they used to defeat me? I lay in the dark, the silence of the house pressing in on me. No longer peaceful, but threatening. Every sound was a potential threat. Every shadow held a new fear. I had outsmarted their greed, but could I outrun the inevitable decline of my own flesh and blood? The game wasn't over. It had just entered a new, more dangerous phase. And the next move, the silence after the storm, is always the worst. That's when you hear the cracks spreading. David and Sarah were gone, but the echo of their fury clung to the walls of this old house like a poison gas. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I just dropped a bomb on my own family, and now I was sitting in the crater, waiting for the fallout. My hand, the one that had signed the will with such steady certainty, was trembling again. But this was a different kind of shake. This was fear, cold, sharp, and entirely new. David's threat, "Well, have you declared incompetent," wasn't just a hot-headed outburst from a spoiled child. It was a battle plan, and I knew, with a sickening certainty that settled deep in my bones, that they would follow through. You see, I'd planned for their greed, I'd planned for their anger, but I hadn't fully planned for their cunning. I'd given them too much credit as decent human beings, and not enough credit as ruthless opponents. A man can be sharp as a tack, but if his body is failing him, it gives them all the ammunition they need. A stumble on the stairs becomes frailty. Forgetfulness about a doctor's appointment becomes dementia. And a decision they simply don't like, that becomes evidence of irrationality. The next morning, the phone started ringing at dawn. I let it go. It was Sarah, then David, then Sarah again. Each ring was a hammer blow on my nerves. I finally unplugged the landline, the cord feeling like a lifeline I was deliberately severing. But my mobile phone, a stupid flip thing David had insisted I carry for emergencies, started buzzing on the kitchen counter. It danced and skittered like an angry insect. I stared at it, knowing that answering it would be like stepping into a lion's den, but also knowing that ignoring it was just delaying the inevitable. On the fifth buzz, I snatched it up. "What?" I growled, my voice raspy from a night without sleep. It was David. His voice was eerily calm, which was far more terrifying than his screaming. "Dad, we need to talk, like reasonable adults." "There's nothing to talk about, David," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "Oh, I think there is," he replied, and I could hear the smug smile in his tone. "We've been on the phone with Mr. Henderson. He's concerned, very concerned about your recent actions." He said the name change, coming so suddenly after a serious medical diagnosis, raises red flags. He thinks a capacity evaluation might be prudent. There it was. The first official shot across the bow. Old man Henderson. I should have known they'd run to him. Had been their lawyer as much as mine for years. Always smoothing things over. Always advising them on how to handle their eccentric father. I felt a surge of betrayal, hot and acidic. Henderson knew me. He knew I was sound of mind. But he also knew who would be paying his bills long after I was gone. Henderson can go to hell, I said. My voice low and steady. My mind is my own. Is it, Dad? David asked, his voice dripping with false sympathy. You legally change your name to Lars Mike on a whim. You disinherit your own children in favor of a cousin we haven't seen in months. Does that sound like the action of a rational man? The man who built Larson Construction from the ground up. He was using my own life, my own accomplishments, as a weapon against me. The irony was so thick I could taste it. It sounds like the action of a man who's finally seen the truth. I shot back. The truth. David let out a short, bitter laugh. The truth is you're sick, and you're vulnerable, and Mike is manipulating you. But we're going to protect you, Dad, even from yourself. We're setting up a meeting with a geriatric specialist, Dr. Evans, next Tuesday. We'll pick you up at 10. It wasn't a request. It was a summons, a command. They were already moving, putting their pieces on the board. A capacity evaluation. If that doctor, whoever he was, deemed me incompetent, they could have a guardian appointed. They could invalidate the new will. They could lock me away in one of their nice assisted living places and take control of everything. My revenge would be undone before I was even cold in the ground. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. I couldn't let that happen. I had to fight back. But how? I was an old, sick man, trapped in his own house. I'm not going to any doctor, I said. But the defiance in my voice sounded weak, even to me. Yes, you are, Dad, David said, his tone final. It's for your own good. See you Tuesday. The line went dead. I stood there in the middle of my kitchen, the silent foam pressed to my ear. The world shrinking around me. They had the momentum. They had the lawyer. They had the system. What did I have? A secret will and a righteous anger. Would that be enough? I needed help. I needed an ally on the inside. I needed Mike. But involving him directly was too dangerous. It would only fuel their narrative that he was pulling the strings. No, I had to be smarter. I had to think like a general. An idea, desperate and wild, began to form. If they were going to use my weakness against me, I would have to document my strength. I would have to prove, beyond any doubt, that I knew exactly what I was doing. I stumbled into my study, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. In the bottom drawer of my desk, buried under old tax returns and manuals for long-discarded power tools, was a small, digital voice recorder. I'd bought it years ago to take notes on a job site when my hands were too dirty for a notepad. I found it, its plastic casing dusty, but seemingly intact. I prayed it still worked. With fumbling fingers, I found a charging cable and plugged it in. A tiny red light glowed to life. Hope, fragile as a bird's egg, stirred in my chest. This would be my weapon, my diary, my evidence. I started that very hour. I sat in my armchair, pointed the recorder at my face, and began to speak. I stated the date and the time. I described, in meticulous detail, the conversation I had just had with David. I explained my reasoning for the name change. I talked about Eleanor, about the values we'd shared, and how our children had abandoned them. I spoke of Mike, not as a beneficiary, but as the son of my heart. I made my case, not to a judge, not yet, but to the cold, unfeeling eye of the machine. It felt strange at first, talking to myself, but as the words poured out, it became a catharsis. It was my truth, my story, uncensored and unedited. I would do this every day. I would record their phone calls. I'd have to figure out the legality of that later, but right now, I was in a war, and all's fair. I would record any interaction with them. I would build a mountain of evidence to prove that Lars Mike, however strange the name, was in full possession of his faculties. The next few days were a strange, tense standoff. David and Sarah didn't visit, but their presence was everywhere. The phone would ring, always from blocked numbers now. I'd let it go to voicemail. Their messages were a masterclass in manipulation. "Dad, it's Sarah. Please, we're so worried about you. We just want to help. Call us back." Her voice would crack with faux emotion. Then David, "Dad, Henderson has drawn up the papers for the competency hearing. It doesn't have to go that far. Just agree to see Dr. Evans. Let us help you." Each message was a trap, baited with concern. I saved them all. Everyone. They were proof of the campaign they were waging. I called Ms. Evans, my lawyer in the city. I told her what was happening. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. "This is a predictable escalation, Mr. Mike," she said, using my new name without a hint of irony. It was a small thing, but it meant the world to me. A competency challenge is their strongest play. We need to get ahead of it. "How?" I asked, feeling the walls closing in. "We need our own evaluation," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "With a neurologist and a psychiatrist of our choosing, someone with impeccable credentials. We need to create a counter-narrative immediately." "I'll make some calls." "Do it," I said, feeling a surge of relief. I wasn't in this alone. I had a professional on my side. "There's more," I added. "I've started recording my thoughts, their phone messages, everything." "Good," she said, and I could hear the approval in her voice. "Document everything. Keep a journal. Write down dates, times, exactly what was said. The more detailed, the better. It shows foresight and cognitive organization. It's harder to argue that a man who keeps meticulous records is losing his mind." So I wrote. I filled a legal pad with my tight, precise script. I wrote about the weather. I wrote about what I had for breakfast. I wrote about the book I was reading. And I wrote about the siege. I was building a fortress of paper and sound around my sanity. The night before the dreaded Tuesday appointment, Mike risked a visit. He came under the cover of darkness, slipping in through the back door like a ghost. He looked tired, wearing lines etched deep around his eyes. "They've been circling, Uncle Lars," he said, sinking into a chair at the kitchen table. "David called me again. He said, if I cared about you, I'd convince you to stop this madness. He said I was killing you with stress. He's the one causing the stress." I snapped, the anger flaring hot and bright. "He's trying to bully me into submission." "I know," Mike said, holding up a placating hand. "I know, but they're not just coming for you. Sarah, she came by my job site today." A cold dread washed over me. What did she do?" "She just showed up," Mike said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Standing there in her designer coat, looking at the half-built frame of a house. She told my foreman she was family, but it was an emergency. She pulled me aside. She was crying, Uncle Lars. Big, Hollywood tears. She said you were having a psychotic break, that you were talking to yourself, recording yourself, that you were a danger to yourself." I felt the blood drain from my face. They knew. How did they know about the recordings? Had I been careless? Was the nurse's aide they'd hired spying on me? The paranoia, which had been a low hum in the background, suddenly screamed into a deafening roar. I wasn't safe anywhere. "What did you say to her?" I asked, my voice a whisper. Mike's face hardened. "I told her to get the hell off my site before I called the police. I told her that you were the sanest man I knew, and that she and her brother were a disgrace. It wasn't smart. I probably played right into their hands, but I couldn't listen to it anymore." He had played the angry, aggressive nephew, the one who would clearly benefit from my insanity. They would use that. They would twist it. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of their strategy pressing down on us. They weren't just attacking me, they were attacking my support system. They were isolating me. It was a classic siege tactic. Cut off the supply lines, demoralize the defenders. "You can't come here anymore, Mike," I said finally, the words tasting like ash. "It's too risky. They're watching. They'll use it against us." Mike looked devastated. "But you can't face this alone." "I'm not alone," I said, tapping the legal pad on the table. I have my words, and I have Miss Evans. You need to stay away. For now, it's the only way. He reluctantly agreed. When he left, the house felt emptier than ever. I was truly on my own now. The final battle was coming, and I was heading into it without my strongest ally by my side. Tuesday morning arrived, grey and cold. I dressed carefully, choosing a crisp button-down shirt and a tweed jacket I hadn't worn in years. I needed to look respectable. I needed to look compos mentis. I ate a light breakfast, though my stomach was a knot of nerves. I placed the digital recorder in the inside pocket of my jacket, turned on. If they were going to drag me to this doctor, I was going to get a record of it. At precisely 10 o'clock, I heard two car doors slam outside. Not one, two. Both of them had come. Of course they had. They wouldn't trust this to just one of them. I opened the door before they could knock. David and Sarah stood on the porch, their faces a mask of tight-lipped concern. They were dressed for court, not a doctor's visit. Sarah in a severe navy suit, David in a starched shirt and tie. They were trying to look official, responsible. The concerned adult children. Dad, David said, his eyes scanning me up and down, looking for any sign of disarray. You're ready? Good. I said I would be, I replied, my voice flat. Sarah forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We just want what's best for you. I didn't answer. I just walked past them and got into the back seat of David's luxury sedan. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a fight. Not yet. The car ride was silent, suffocatingly so. The only sound was the soft whir of the heater and the faint, almost imperceptible click of the recorder in my pocket. Dr. Evans' office was in a sterile medical building downtown. The waiting room was quiet, filled with muted colors and aging magazines. David did all the talking at the front desk, his voice a low, confident murmur. Lars Larson for a 10:30 with Dr. Evans were his children. The nurse, a young woman with a friendly smile, glanced at me. And how are we today, Mr. Larson? I'm fine, I said, giving her a genuine smile. Thank you for asking. I saw David's back stiffen. He didn't like that. He didn't like anyone interacting with me directly. It undermined their narrative of the poor, confused old man. We were led into an examination room. It was cold and impersonal. Dr. Evans entered a few minutes later. He was a man in his 50s, with a receding hairline and a brisk, no-nonsense manner. He shook David's and Sarah's hands warmly, then turned to me. Mr. Larson, he said, offering a hand that I shook firmly. I'm Dr. Evans. Your children have asked me to do an evaluation today, just to make sure everything's ticking along as it should be. I understand, I said, meeting his gaze, though I feel the evaluation is unnecessary. Well, be the judge of that, Dad, David said, a little too quickly. Dr. Evans glanced at him, then back at me. Why don't we let Mr. Larson speak for himself? He said mildly, and for a fleeting second, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this man was objective. He began with simple questions. What day was it? Who was the president? I answered them all correctly, my voice clear and steady. I could feel David and Sarah fidgeting behind me. This wasn't going the way they'd hoped. Then Dr. Evans moved on to memory tests. He gave me 3 words to remember. Apple, table, penny. He told me he'd ask for them later. We talked about current events. We talked about my past. I told him about building my business, about Eleanor. I spoke with passion and clarity, painting a vivid picture of my life. I was performing, and I was performing well. But then he asked the question I knew was coming, the one they had primed him to ask. Mr. Larson, your children are concerned about some recent decisions you've made. Specifically, they mentioned you've legally changed your name. Can you tell me about that? I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment of truth. I could feel the weight of the recorder in my pocket. A secret witness. I changed my name from Lars Larson to Lars Mike, I said, my voice even. And can you explain your reasoning, Dr. Evans asked, his pen poised over his notepad. I looked past him, at my children. They were leaning forward, their eyes hungry. They were waiting for me to slip up, to say something crazy. I did it for personal reasons, I said, choosing my words with care. The name Larson no longer held the meaning for me that it once did. It had become tainted. Tainted, Dr. Evans prompted. By entitlement, I said, my eyes locking with David's. I saw a flash of anger in his gaze. I built a life with that name. A good life. But I realized that to some people, it was just a brand. A logo on a check. I wanted a name that represented something else. A fresh start. A fresh start at 78, Dr. Evans asked, not unkindly, but with clinical curiosity. Is there an expiration date on reinvention, doctor? I asked. He almost smiled. I suppose not. And this fresh start, it involved changing your will as well. I understand. It did. And you understand the consequences of that decision, that you are disinheriting your biological children. I understand the legal consequences perfectly, I said. The emotional consequences, well, those were set in motion long before I signed any paper. Dad, that's not true. Sarah burst out, unable to contain herself any longer. We've always loved you. This is the illness talking. Can't you see? Hayes paranoid. He thinks we're against him. Dr. Evans held up a hand. Please, Miss Larson, I need to hear from your father. But the dam had broken. David jumped in. Hayes been manipulated, doctor, by our cousin, Mike. Hayes isolated Dad, turned him against us. This name change, it's to Mike's name. Don't you see? It's all part of his plan. The room erupted into chaos. My children were talking over each other, their voices rising in a crescendo of accusations and pleas. They were unraveling right in front of the doctor, their carefully constructed facade of concern cracking to reveal the raw greed and panic beneath. And I just sat there, silent, calm. I watched them. I let them dig their own grave. Dr. Evans tried to regain control. Please, one at a time. But they couldn't stop. The stress of the last week, the fear that their inheritance was slipping away, had pushed them over the edge. They were showing their true colors. And the doctor was seeing it all. Finally, after several minutes of this, Dr. Evans turned to me. His expression was unreadable. Mr. Larson, would you mind waiting outside for a moment? I'd like to speak with your children alone. Not at all, I said calmly. I stood up, my legs feeling weak, but holding firm. I walked out of the room and closed the door behind me. I stood in the silent hallway, leaning against the cool wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had done it. I had stayed calm. I had been rational. And they had shown themselves to be emotional, manipulative, and desperate. I could only hope that Dr. Evans had seen the same thing. A few minutes later, the door opened. David and Sarah emerged, their faces flushed and angry. They wouldn't look at me. We're leaving, David muttered, storming down the hall. Dr. Evans stood in the doorway. He looked at me, and for a second, I thought I saw a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. The evaluation is complete, Mr. Larson, he said. I'll have my report sent to the relevant parties. Good day. And with that, he closed the door. The ride home was even more silent than the ride there. The tension in the car was so thick you could cut it with a knife. They knew they'd blown it. They knew they'd behaved like hysterical fools in front of the one person they needed to convince of my instability. When we pulled up to my house, I got out without a word. This isn't over, Dad, David said through the car window, his voice low and venomous. You think you've won? This is just the beginning. I didn't reply. I just walked up the path to my front door, my head held high. I had survived the first skirmish, but David was right. It wasn't over. The war for my mind, for my legacy, had only just begun. And the next battle, I feared, would be fought not in a doctor's office, but in a courtroom, and I had no idea if my recordings and my shaky courage would be enough to win it. I unlocked my door and stepped inside, the familiar silence of the house greeting me, but it felt different now. It felt like the quiet before the storm. I took the record out of my pocket and pressed stop. The tiny red light blinked off. I had my evidence. But as I stood there alone, a terrifying thought occurred to me. What if it wasn't enough? What if the system, the lawyers, the judges, all defaulted to the easy story, the story of the confused old man and his concerned, well-dressed children? What if the truth was just too messy, too ugly, for anyone to believe? The doubt, once planted, began to grow, its roots digging deep into my newfound confidence. I had won a battle, but the fear of losing the war was now a cold, heavy stone in my gut. The silence after a war is a strange thing. It's not peaceful, not at first. It's just empty. The echoes of the explosions linger in your ears. You keep bracing for the next attack, your body tense, your nerves frayed raw. That's how I felt after the doctor's appointment. It stood my ground. It watched David and Sarah unravel. But the victory felt hollow, because I knew it was just a single battle in a much larger war. Dr. Evans' report arrived a week later. It came in a thick, official-looking envelope, delivered by a courier. My hands trembled so badly, I could barely tear it open. I skimmed the medical jargon, my heart in my throat, looking for the conclusion. And there it was, in cold, clinical type : while Mr. Mike exhibits signs of considerable stress and strong, fixed beliefs regarding his family. There is no evidence to suggest a lack of testamentary capacity or an inability to manage his own affairs. His reasoning for his recent legal and financial decisions, while unorthodox and causing significant familial discord, is internally consistent and based on a clear, if deeply cynical, assessment of his children's motivations. I read it 3 times. Then I sank into my armchair, the pages fluttering to the floor. I should have cheered. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt a deep, bone-aching exhaustion. Head called me deeply cynical. Was I? Or was I just finally clear-sighted? The report was a shield, but it was a shield that acknowledged the poison that had necessitated it. Of course, David and Sarah didn't accept it. The report from their doctor was, in their words, inconclusive. They demanded a second opinion, then a third. Miss Evans fought them every step of the way. My life became a grim rotation of doctors' offices and lawyers' conferences. I was poked and prodded, questioned and quizzed. They asked me to remember lists of words, to draw clocks, to explain proverbs. A rolling stone gathers no moss, one psychiatrist said. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "It means my children think I've been still for too long, and they're eager to see what's underneath me." He didn't write that down. Through it all, I kept recording. My journals filled another legal pad. The digital recorder became my constant companion, a mechanical confessor. I documented the endless appointments, the patronizing tones of the doctors they hired, the way Sarah would helpfully remind me of things I hadn't forgotten. "Remember, Dad, your birthday is in July," she'd say sweetly to a neurologist, as if I'd ever forgotten the day I was born. I recorded it all. I was building my castle, one brick of evidence at a time. The stress was eating me alive. The cough that had been a nuisance became a constant, racking presence. I lost weight. My clothes hung off me. I looked in the mirror and saw a ghost, a gaunt caricature of the robust man he'd been. The illness I had used as a prop was now a very real jailer, tightening its grip. Every day was a struggle, but the fight was the only thing keeping me going. The need to see it through. The final showdown wasn't in a doctor's office. It was in a probate court, a room that smelled of old wood and disappointment. They'd filed a formal petition to have me declared incompetent and to invalidate the new will. This was it. The whole, ugly affair laid bare before a judge. The day of the hearing, I dressed with more care than I had for my own wedding. A suit that now swam on me, a tie that felt like a noose. Miss Evans met me at the courthouse. She was a pillar of calm professionalism. "Remember, Lars," she said, using my first name for the first time. "Just be yourself. Be the man you are in your recordings. The truth is on our side." The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. David and Sarah were there, flanked by a slick, expensive-looking lawyer I didn't recognize. They didn't look at me. They stared straight ahead, their faces masks of grim determination. Mike was there too, sitting in the back. Our eyes met for a second, and he gave me a small, tight nod. He was my lone soldier in the gallery. The judge was a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened as their lawyer laid out their case. He painted a picture of a once great man in steep decline, manipulated by a cunning opportunist. He talked about the sudden name change, the bizarre new will, my isolation from my loving children. He made it sound so plausible, so tragic. I felt a cold dread seeping into me. He was good. He was making my justice sound like insanity. Then it was Ms. Evans' turn. She stood up, cool and collected. Your Honor, my client is not a confused old man. He is a man who has been profoundly betrayed by the people he loved most, and he has taken rational, legal steps to protect his legacy. She began to present our evidence. She entered the reports from the independent doctors we'd hired, all affirming my competency. Then, she did something I didn't expect. She approached the bench with my digital recorder and a transcript of the journals. Your Honor, the best evidence of Mr. Mike's state of mind comes from Mr. Mike himself. 4 months. He has been meticulously documenting his thoughts and his interactions with his children. David's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is self-serving and irrelevant. Overruled, the judge said, her eyes fixed on the recorder with keen interest. I'll hear it, Ms. Evans played selected clips. The room was silent as my voice, raspy but clear, filled the space. I heard myself describing the conversation in the car with David. He said, "We need to make sure everything goes smoothly to me and Sarah, to avoid complications." He didn't say you. He didn't say the family. He said me and Sarah, as if my life's work was already their property. I heard Sarah's voicemails, her voice shifting from faux concern to shrill demand. I heard my own journal entries, read aloud by Ms. Evans, detailing the campaign of pressure, the threats of assisted living, the constant, grinding anxiety. I dared a glance at David and Sarah. David's face was a thundercloud, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would crack. Sarah had gone pale, her hands clutching the edge of the table, her knuckles white. They were hearing their own words, their own strategy, played back to them in this sterile, public room. It was the most humiliating experience of their lives. I should have felt a surge of vindication, but all I felt was a sad, sick pity. When the recordings finished, the courtroom was utterly still. The judge took off her glasses and polished them slowly, methodically. She looked from me, to my children, and back to me. This is one of the most troubling cases I've ever presided over, she began, her voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. It is not the court's place to judge family dynamics. Our role is narrow, to determine if Lars Mike possesses the testamentary capacity to have executed his will. She looked at David and Sarah's lawyer. Your clients have presented a case based on the unusual nature of Mr. Mike's decisions, but unusual is not the same as incompetent. The evidence presented by the respondent, particularly his own contemporaneous recordings, paints a compelling picture of a man who is not only fully aware of his actions, but who has a detailed, consistent, and, frankly, understandable rationale for them. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The petition to declare Lars Mike incompetent is denied. The last will and testament dated October 18th stands as valid. It was over. Just like that. There was no dramatic outburst. David simply stood up, his face a blank, terrifying mask, and walked out of the courtroom without a backward glance. Sarah followed, weeping silent, angry tears. Their lawyer gathered his papers, avoiding everyone's eyes. I sat there, stunned. The war was won. The field was mine. Ms. Evans helped me to my feet. It's done, Lars. You did it. Mike came forward, his eyes shining. He didn't say anything. He just put his arms around me and held me. It was the first real, uncalculated human touch I'd felt in months. The aftermath was a quiet, administrative affair. The assets were transferred. The business, the houses, the investments, all of it went to Mike, just as he'd planned. He tried to refuse, of course. He sat right here in this room, in that very chair, and said, "Uncle Lars, this is too much. This was your fight. I don't want it like this." I placed a trembling hand on his. "Mike," I said, my voice weak but firm. It was never about the money. It was about the principle. And the principle is that this legacy goes to someone who sees it as a responsibility, not a reward. You take it. You build something good with it. Honor the name. That's all I ask. He finally agreed. He's a good man. He'll do right by it. As for David and Sarah, they never spoke to me again. They hired lawyers to challenge the will, of course, but without the incompetency ruling, they had no leg to stand on. Their challenges were dismissed, one after another. I heard through the grapevine that David's business ventures faltered without the prospect of my money to back him. Sarah and her husband sold their 2-big house and moved to a smaller town. I don't know if they are happy. I suspect not. Greed is a poor foundation for a life. You'd think I'd be satisfied. I had my revenge. I served them a dish of poetic justice, cold and exact. I exposed them for who they were. I won. But here is the truth, the one I only whisper into this microphone in the dead of night. Winning feels an awful lot like losing. I got my justice, but I lost my children. I am dying alone in this big, empty house, surrounded by the ghosts of the family I thought I had. The silence I fought so hard to protect is now my only companion, and it's a heavy, heavy silence. Sometimes I think about Eleanor. I talk to her like a crazy old man. I ask her if I did the right thing. I never get an answer, but I like to think she would have understood. She was always the brave one. The cough is worse now. The doctor says it's a matter of weeks, maybe days. I'm not afraid. I'm just tired. So very tired. Mike comes by every day. He doesn't talk about the money or the business. He brings soup. He tells me about the houses he's building. He sits with me in the silence. He's the son I wish I'd had. No, that's not fair. He is the son I have. The one who chose me. I'm recording this now as my final statement. My last will and testament, not of property, but of truth. I set out to teach my children a lesson about greed and betrayal. And I did. But the lesson cost me everything. Was it worth it? I don't know. I truly don't. All I have left is the hope that somewhere, someone hearing this story might understand that it's not about the money. It's never about the money. It's about the love. It's about the respect. And if you trade those things for an inheritance, all you're left with is a pile of paper and the silence that will echo for the rest of your days. My name was Lars Larson. Then it was Lars Mike. Soon it will be no more than a name on a piece of paper, a name on a headstone next to my Eleanor. But the story will remain.